Throughout the fall and winter of 1991, police searched throughout New England for a woman who had disappeared from her home in Maine. Police were unsure whether she had run away from home or was the victim of a crime. A year later, investigators found a lead that had been under their noses all along. Portland, Maine, is the largest city in the state, and in times past was its capital. It is a deep-water port on the shores of Casco Bay, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean. This explains its role as a major fishing center. Pearl Smith worked as a fish packer. Every day she packed crates of fish to be shipped across the country. It was hard work for which there was little pay. After her workday, she often went to the bar. She was a regular there, as was Bill Branc, a man 13 years older than her. Branc was a trucker. His job was to haul fish from Maine to Montreal. The two men had a lot in common. They liked to drink, but they were not lucky in love. Pearl had been divorced 5 times and Bill's third marriage had just ended. They eventually fell in love and married in the summer of 1986. Their relationship proved to be very close. They met for lunch every day at a restaurant on the marina, but on August 13, 1991, Pearl's daughter, Elaine, called the police to report her mother missing. According to her, she had failed to show up for a family reunion she had been looking forward to. Elaine described her mother as a very loving and caring woman who was a best friend to everyone and was willing to give the last shirt to anyone in need. In addition, she was always there when someone needed her. South Portland detective Linda Barker was brought in to investigate the case. At the Branc home, she noticed that none of Pearl's clothes, jewelry, or personal belongings were missing, and her most prized possession, a black Cadillac with Pearl B license plates, was still in the garage. It's worth noting that Pearl was very fond of her Cadillac and very rarely went anywhere without it. This was one of the reasons Elaine was very concerned that her mother had gone away but left her Cadillac behind. She said the car left in the garage indicated that Pearl never left the house. Bill Branc told police that he and his wife had an argument, after which he left to get Chinese food. When he returned home, she was gone, but he said he wasn't worried because she would sometimes leave without explanation. Officers were able to find out that Pearl was indeed often gone from home for 2, 3, 4, even 7 days in a row. She was visiting friends in Old Orchard Beach or relatives, so while it happened, it wasn't unusual. But if the car was still in the garage, how could she have gotten away? Police called airlines, bus and cab services, but there was no evidence that Pearl had left town. Bill Branc then told the police that his wife had probably run off with another man, and the police chief agreed with him. Sheriff Schwartz did not believe Pearl was missing. He believed she was drunk and may have run off with another man. Schwartz knew Bill personally and believed he was not the kind of man to hurt anyone, and at one time he made this statement to reporter Christine Young and said she was an alcoholic. She was married 6 or 7 times. She probably eloped with one of her ex-husbands. Then Christina asked him, what about her current husband? But Schwartz said, no, I've known him for 20 years. It can't be him. Days went by, weeks went by, and Pearl Branc's family feared they would never see her again. In the port city of Portland, Maine, police continued to search for Pearl Branc, 48. Prosecutors were suspicious of the woman's husband because he had not reported her missing. Bill's behavior in this case was peculiar. If you came home one day and found that your wife had disappeared without any explanation, you would file a missing persons report. But Branc didn't do anything. It was Pearl's daughter from a previous marriage who went to the police. Elaine also stated that she had no doubt that her mom was no longer alive, as she was the kind of person who would go to great lengths just to be able to contact her family. A short time later, Pearl's suitcase was found partially packed on her bed. It had blood spatters on it, which officers believed could have come from either things thrown at the man or perhaps during the struggle someone had struck her with some sort of weapon. The police then managed to establish that in the days before her disappearance, Pearl Branc spent more and more time in her favorite bar, where she told her friends that she and Bill were fighting a lot, mostly about money, and that she had been depressed for a long time. As soon as news of Pearl's disappearance hit the local media, reports poured in. One of Pearl's friends said he saw her walking late at night along the pier, but none of those reports were confirmed and the case went cold. Until 6 weeks later, a hiker walking on the Appalachian Trail, about 320 kilometers from the town of Nugentshire, found Pearl Branc's purse, containing all of the woman's documents, jewelry, cosmetics, and money. On the same day, Elaine confirmed that it all belonged to her mother. A search conducted in the area revealed nothing else, but police have now labeled the case as a possible homicide. Also, according to the officer, the purse was lying in plain sight with the woman's personal belongings, driver's license, jewelry, and money inside. In addition, blood spatters were found on the outside of the purse. He's sure it was thrown there on purpose. Someone wanted it to be found. Meanwhile, Detective Barker returned to the Branc's house to question Bill. Once inside, she noticed something new. She was immediately struck by what she thought was a new rug, and she asked Bill where he had gotten it. To which the man replied that it was the same carpet that had always been here and said he had just shampooed it with carpet shampoo and vacuumed it. Linda was amazed because the carpet was sparkling clean. However, when neighbors were interviewed, it turned out that they had seen Bill Bruns struggling to get the carpet steam cleaner into the house. But why would a man lie to police about shampooing the carpet? A few days afterwards, Pearl's daughter came to the father's house to talk about her suspicions. Elaine said, "You know, Bill, you're the last person to see my mother. You're the only one who might know what happened to her." And the man in response just sat there looking at her and didn't say a word. To search the Branc's home, police used service dogs that had been trained with a special chemical formula called pseudotrope. This formula mimics the odor of decomposing flesh. The trained dogs lie down when they detect the odor of a dead body. When Dr. Edward David walked his dog Ray through the house, the dog walked around the house several times and then headed to the basement where, near the entrance to the subfloor space, he lay down. That meant that was where the dead body was located. The detectives began digging up the area indicated by the dog, confident that Pearl Branc's secret disappearance would finally be solved. But to their surprise, they found nothing. After months of searching for Pearl Bruns, the only clue to her disappearance was her purse found on a hiking trail 320 kilometers from her New Hampshire home. A service dog detected the odor of human remains in Pearl Bruns' basement, but the digging yielded nothing. It was a major setback for investigators. According to them, the investigation was hard because it went on for a very long time, and at some point they came to the conclusion that they were doing something wrong. But despite all the setbacks and the lack of new evidence, the cops were certain that Pearl was dead and were determined to find out exactly what had happened and who the killer was. Around this time, there was speculation that Pearl's body might have been dumped at sea or somewhere along the highway that Bill Bruns used every week in his truck, hauling fish from Maine to Canada. Some of the officers thought this was a great way to dispose of the body, since Bill had a refrigerated truck and he just had to stick the corpse in it and transport it along with the fish. There was a lot of blood there anyway, and it was unlikely anyone noticed anything, but that wasn't the only assumption. Given Bill's connections with the fishermen on the wharf, Pearl could have been taken out to sea and thrown overboard in someone's fishing boat. Meanwhile, Bill Bruns continued to claim that his wife had eloped with her ex-husband. But one of Pearl's friends revealed information refuting this. According to Diane Itzer, shortly before her disappearance, the woman told her, "There's one thing I want you to know. If anything happens to me, tell me Bill did it." Diane didn't realize at first what she was talking about, and then forgot about the conversation altogether. So the police got another search warrant for the Branc's home. This time they used the chemical Luminol. When Luminol is sprayed on a spot where blood has been washed away with water or detergents, it glows or fluoresces. When Luminol was used in the Branc's home, officers were able to see a horrifying scene. Blood spatters were visible on the walls and floor. Bloody footprints led to the bathroom. Carpeting and linoleum showed areas where large amounts of blood had been spilled and subsequently cleaned up. There was even more blood on the stairs leading to the basement, and each step indicated that a bloody object had been dragged down the stairs. There was a large blood stain at the bottom of the stairs, and most disturbing was the blood stain found in the dirty 1 by 8 meter basement. There, a bloody footprint of a human body, the same height as Pearl Bruns, was found on the dirt floor. It was clear that a large amount of blood had been spilled and cleaned up in the Bruns home, contradicting Bill's version that his wife had simply left. Detective Harriman then presented Bill Bruns with evidence of Luminol's work and asked him what he thought. Bill replied, "I would suspect the husband." Immediately afterward, however, the man continued to insist on his innocence. But when asked to take a lie detector test, he refused. The police didn't know what to do next. They had already excavated the basement floor and found nothing. For the next 9 months, the investigation stalled until police learned of a new forensic tool they hoped would lead them to Pearl Bruns' body. Despite 3 separate searches and previous excavations in the Branc's basement, police were certain that was where the key to Pearl Bruns' disappearance lay. According to the officer, they couldn't give up that there might be evidence in the basement, but digging up the entire floor by hand was nearly impossible. That's when Detective Harriman learned about a new forensic tool, ground-penetrating radar. He called Harding C, a local environmental engineering firm that had the equipment. 13 months after Pearl Bruns disappeared, the basement of their home was surveyed with radar. This technology is commonly used to find large metal objects buried in the ground. A GPR device sends high-frequency radio waves into the ground. When the signal hits an obstacle, such as a buried container, the signal is reflected back to the device. But finding the body posed a problem. The human body is apparently made up mostly of water, fatty tissue, flesh and bone, and according to geophysicist Scott Culkin, it was in this particular study that they became convinced that the human body doesn't transmit radio wave energy very well. In the basement of the Branc, radar detected a constant reflection at a depth of 1 meter from the surface. Preliminary excavation revealed rust-colored oxidized sand, but there was another area where the reflection was not on the recording at all. There was an area of white spotting, nothing was visible, meaning something had absorbed the energy. The researchers didn't know what it was until they dug it up and looked at it. When Bill Branc returned home from work, investigators began excavating his basement again. When they had dug only a few shovels full, a plastic bag buried about 60 centimeters below the surface caught their eye, and it turned out to be a head wrapped in a plastic bag. Investigators then started digging further and found a badly decomposed human body wrapped in 2 large garbage bags and tied with rope and duct tape. The man was wearing a wristwatch with Pearl's name engraved on the dial, and pink shoelaces like the ones Pearl had last been seen wearing. The smell of decomposition was overwhelming, and the police went upstairs to meet Bill Branc one last time. It was about 6 in the evening and the man was sitting upstairs in his home in the kitchen. He was eating spaghetti for dinner when officers came through the door and informed him that he had been arrested for the murder of his wife. Bill responded that murder was a pretty high-profile charge and stated that he had not killed anyone and they had no proof. The police officer then informed him about the dead body found in the basement, and after that the man confessed everything. When they dug up the body, the stench of the body could be felt for miles, and he was sitting upstairs in the house eating spaghetti, and when they went up to arrest him, he asked if he could finish his dinner before they took him away. Bill Branc was arrested and charged with murder. Bill Branc eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. After the trial, investigators stated that without the forensic advances such as Luminol and GPR that were successfully used in this case, they believe it is highly likely that Bill Branc would have gotten away with murder. Ironically, during the autopsy on Pearl Branc's body, the pathologist determined that she had terminal cancer and had no more than 6 months to live. If he had just tolerated my mom, she would have died a natural death anyway. She wouldn't have been able to see him in jail, and I imagine she had the last laugh at him because, like I said, if he had just tolerated it, she would have died on her own, said Pearl's daughter.